Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Projectors Facebook Live session, our virtual conversation with Aware in regards to the movie Promising Young Woman. Thank you for joining us. It's been a while since we've done any sort of Facebook Live session, so if there's any technical issues, I hope you guys are hearing me fine and all that. But yeah, because it's cinemas have reopened, so we've been pretty much focused on what's happening at the cinemas. We do have a bunch of screenings going on. If you haven't caught films like Minari, Nomadland, do also check that out. And we do have some new films on the Projector Plus. As part of a Women Make Film Festival, we do have a film called I Am Not a Witch on the Projector Plus. So please try and catch that virtually anytime and at home if you like it. But today, yeah, we're pretty much focused on Promising Young Woman. It's a film directed by Emerald Fennel, a female director, and it's also got 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Film and Best Director and Best Actress. So we'll find out in April whether Promising Young Woman will win any of the awards. If you have not watched it, do go and catch it at the Projector. Tickets are available at theprojector.sg. Tonight, I'm quite happy to introduce 2 of our very good friends from Aware, Shailey Hingorani and Kelly Leow. They're no strangers to audiences who've been watching our virtual conversations, our pseudo feminist film club, I would call it. And they've volunteered their time to talk about important issues that are raised in the film Promising Young Woman. Just to let you know, there's a trigger warning for this. Both the film and the virtual conversation will address issues of sexual assault. So please be aware of that, and do leave the conversation if you're uncomfortable with that. All right, at that point, I will remove myself and let Shailey and Kelly have the airtime.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Shailey.
Hi, Kelly.
Thank you so much to Prashant for the intro, and thank you so much to the Projector for having us to talk about this film. I think we're very excited. We've promised to try to keep it to 1 hour this time after the, shall we say, disastrously long previous attempt at doing this online discussion. So we have a lot of things to talk about. I am kind of scared because we have so many things to talk about. But yeah, so I guess one thing we should say is that we're going to be discussing the plot of Promising Young Woman in a lot of detail. So if you haven't watched the film, you probably want to stop listening to this right now and go and watch it, because this will be very spoilery and also probably quite incomprehensible. Also, I don't know any of the characters' names, so I'm just going to refer to them as the actors the whole time, and I'm sorry if that is confusing to anyone. Okay, Shailey.
Yes.
We are gonna be... Oh yeah, sorry.
No. Sorry. You were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say we were going to just be asking each other questions. So I know you have some questions for me, if you want to begin.
I do. So thank you so much, Projector, for having us. I mean, this is such a great opportunity. Kelly and I love talking about films, and to be able to share this discussion with all of Projector's sort of friends and supporters is really, really exciting. I wanted to start the discussion today off with something positive. I know a lot has been written about the film already, both positive and negative. Prashant mentioned it has been nominated for a number of awards. I wanted to ask you, Kelly, what you thought the most sort of positive aspects of the film were.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are a lot of really positive aspects of the film. I think there are lots of things to like about this film, especially if you are somebody who is interested in sexual violence and narratives about sexual violence, as we, of course, are. I will just mention that Aware runs the nation's only dedicated center for the support of sexual assault victims called the Sexual Assault Care Center. And so I think a lot of our own kind of insight and positions on sexual violence really stem from our work with the Sexual Assault Care Center and working with the survivors that come to the center every day, both male and female. But yeah, so I think one thing that very obviously the film gets, and which is why, you know, we were so excited to watch the film, is that it really captures, I think, the kind of like essential despair of living in a post-Me Too world. I mean, I think it's really hard if you're an engaged, you know, feminist or engaged citizen to kind of look at the news, just kind of keep up with what's going on in the landscape of sexual violence around the world, and not feel, you know, very often like incredibly bleak and infuriated, right? And have a lot of kind of pent up frustration all the time. And I think that the kind of central premise of the film is about a woman who has that exact feeling, right? And I mean, I can't say that I cannot relate to that feeling, right? I think that probably I feel that at various points in a week, like multiple times, right? And I think that's where, when we think about the idea of revenge, the theme of revenge, or even like vigilantism, which, you know, the main character is a vigilante, I think we know that that kind of stems out of an overall kind of disillusionment with the system, with, you know, justice, and a feeling that, you know, a lot of this like kind of never ending onslaught of bad things are happening out there to women all the time, and there's really very little that a person can do about it. So I think, you know, definitely that just kind of core emotion of the story is kind of immediately attractive, right, to me and to you. And yeah, I also like to kind of think about the title, Promising Young Woman, and how that kind of really captures something that we talk about a lot at Aware, which is, you know, the idea of promise, of potential, and how so often we see in you know, in cases, especially in the news, with the media coverage of court cases, you know, we always see that the potential of the male perpetrator is kind of emphasized, right? A lot of times the judge, when kind of explaining the sentence, will say, well, you know, this person went to a great school and has good grades and has every sign of succeeding in life. Look at his promise and look at his potential, and, you know, let's not take that away from him because he did this one thing. And what we always say at Aware is that, you know, what about the promise and potential of the survivor, you know, whose life has also been very much disrupted by this event, and, you know, is probably going to be living with a lifetime of trauma, or, you know, on some level, because of this. And what about her promise and her potential? So I like that the film, in the title alone, kind of tells you, okay, we're going to look at the other side of that kind of trope that we see. What do you like about the film?
I have to admit that going in, I was expecting the film to start with a visual sort of enactment of Nina's rape, which is the case with a lot of rape revenge films, right? But not in the case of Promising Young Woman. I think in the film, the rape sort of takes place off screen. And in fact, we meet Cassie, the childhood friend of the victim, Nina, a few years, I think about 7 years after the sexual assault or after her death. I like that the film focuses squarely on trauma, and specifically on secondary trauma. We know rape is an extremely traumatic experience which affects not only the primary victim, but also their friends and families. And I think the film really shines in bringing attention to secondary victims of sexual assault. Cassie, as the childhood sort of best friend, embodies significant levels of traumatization and shows the links between the trauma that secondary victims often feel and the recurrent thoughts they have about being able to prevent the assault, feeling let down by others, which you see Cassie sort of grapple with. Of course, I think it's possible to complicate this sort of reading of the film, right? You could say that Cassie sort of centers Nina's trauma on herself. She becomes Nina's avenging angel, because we don't really know if Nina ever gave her explicit consent to carry out this sort of revenge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we'll definitely talk more about that, because we have a lot of thoughts about that as well, and what Nina's role should be in the story and what it is. But yeah, I mean, I just also want to add that, you know, one other thing that I like about the film, and thinking about this idea of that there are many victims, right? It's not just the person who was assaulted. It is often their family, their friends, the people around them. I think about I think Chanel Miller really gets at this very well in her book, Know My Name, where she, talks about her family's reaction, how her sister's education at university is just constantly disrupted by needing to go and testify at the trials. And yeah, I mean, it's really a kind of concentric circle of pain, right? That, that the justice system really doesn't, and a lot of these narratives don't really capture at all. But just in the same way that we're talking about that, I think we can also talk about the idea that, there are many perpetrators. Well, there are not many perpetrators. There's maybe one person who is guilty, but there are whole systems and societies that are responsible, right, and complicit in the perpetration of sexual violence. And, we see that in this film very clearly because, the people that Cassie puts on her list of people to go and torture. None of them, well, yeah, I mean, many of them are not the actual, rapists, right? They are the school, the dean of the school, who kind of dismissed the report that was made. It's the friends, the bystanders, even the lawyer that represented the perpetrator. So all these people, all these systems serve to kind of entrench these societal norms of violence and the miscarriage of justice in this case, right? And I think that it's also what the film did that was clever in the kind of in this theme was showing that it's not all about that, violence kind of has many different forms, right? And we talk about this a lot at SACC when we say that, victim blaming is in itself, can be a form of violence and can really re-traumatize a survivor when they, tell somebody that they have been assaulted and the person says, I don't believe you, or why didn't you fight back, or one of the many victim blaming things that in and of itself can be even more traumatic sometimes for the survivor to hear than even experiencing the actual assault. So I love that the film really took time to kind of flesh this out. And I actually have, I wrote down a list of all the victim blaming things that people say, which I will get into in a minute. But I also think that, in thinking about that theme, the film kind of doesn't really, there's some kind of muddiness for me and contradictions in that idea that violence is not only physical, which we will get to.
Yes.
But yeah.
Following on from what you were just saying, right? I think you're sort of getting at this idea that the film defines violence in a fairly expansive, comprehensive sort of fashion, right? And we see many different depictions of violence in the film. I was wondering if you could give us some examples of what that looks like so that we know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I listed out all the different kind of characters that Cassie goes after, right? And the people that that she sees as kind of having aided and abetted in not just the violence against Nina, but then the kind of subsequent lack of justice. So you see the Alison Brie character, who's their friend, the Connie Britton character, who's the dean of the school, Alfred Molina, who's the lawyer, even Bo Burnham, who was later revealed to have been present at the rape, and even someone like Max Greenfield, who is the friend of the rapist. And I would like to talk about him a little bit more because I think he plays an interesting role. But so I'm just going to read out all the lines that I wrote down that, which I thought was very clever, actually, that the film, took time, because these are, I mean, honestly, I think in our line of work, these lines feel like cliches, right? Because we see them over and over and over and over again, right? You really can't get away from them. And it's so annoying. And so every time someone said that, I was just just rolling my eyes. But for me, the kind of effect of just hearing these ideas and lines and cliches and excuses just given over and over again made them actually feel like lines. They are lines. They're lines that we say, that we spout, and we're almost like actors in a play, in a bad script that we can't escape, right? Where we don't even know I don't think people really think about what these lines mean or really feel like they mean what they're saying, but these are just words that we have all been given over and over again. And so we just all start to say them as well, right? So nice guy, I think that appears a whole bunch of times. Adam Brody says, you're safe, it's okay, even as he's assaulting Carey Mulligan. The super bad guy says, I'm really high right now, I don't know what I'm doing. Alison Brie says, I don't make the rules. And she says, oh, Nina was kind of slutty. She slept around and she drank so much, what can isn't it her fault? Connie Britton says like a million of them. Like Connie Britton's whole scene is basically just these lines. But she says, he said, she said, she says, we don't like to admit when we have made ourselves vulnerable and when we have made a bad choice, not talking about the perpetrator, but talking about the victim. She says, I don't want to ruin a young man's life. She says, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. She says, innocent until proven guilty. Bo Burnham says, when kind of confronted at the end by Carey Mulligan, says, well, I was a kid. And then he kind of makes the argument later, well, nobody's perfect. Haven't you done something wrong? And then even the rapist himself says, I'm a gentleman. I mean, says it to Carey Mulligan, not to the victim, but still. And then for me, when Max Greenfield actually says, after Carey Mulligan has been murdered by Al Monroe, and Max Greenfield finds him in the bedroom the next day, and he discovers that his friend has murdered Carey Mulligan. The one thing that he says many times, right, is it's not your fault. And he kind of approaches Al Monroe and embraces him and really comforts him and is extremely supportive. And I thought that was a really clever kind of reversal, because it's not your fault. It's what we tell everybody and what we say to victims, right? Because it's not their fault. So I think it was like very clever and funny, even that, in this scene you see somebody saying it to the perpetrator. I mean, whose fault, who else's fault could it be? It's obviously his fault. Yeah, but the instinct of the guy says, it's not your fault, and really comfort him. And I thought that was so clever.
Right.
Yeah, do you have any other ones to add to that litany that I just gave?
No, I think that was fairly comprehensive.
Okay, thank you. This is the product of my furious note-taking during the film. Okay, so we've talked about the things that we like about the film. Maybe let's get into some areas where, we maybe found that some of these things were complicated in ways that, maybe weren't always so productive, or, that didn't really rest easy with us.
Right. So I can go first. I think I said earlier that I liked that the film centered on Cassie's trauma. For me, that's actually both a positive and a negative. While on the one hand, we see how deeply consuming trauma can be, so much so that it can be a part of your everyday life. But on the other hand, I feel the film doesn't really allow you to develop a conception of who Cassie is beyond her motivation to avenge Nina's rape and subsequent death. To me, her character feels really reductive, right? It feels like it's been reduced down to the long shadow of the worst thing that's happened to her. I actually wish the film had spent more time developing Cassie's interior life. I would have liked to know a little bit more about who she is as a person. Of course, you get little snippets here and there, but we don't really get a full sort of holistic understanding of who Cassie is as a person beyond the fact that she seems to be obsessed with Nina's sort of rape and subsequent death. Also, Cassie's primary sort of way of processing her secondary trauma is by exacting revenge and exposing men for whom I think being a good guy is a routine they have perfected, right, in order to score chicks. Her stalking and shaming routine with guys when she wakes up from her pretend sort of drunken stupor to ask the men who were about to assault her what they're doing. It feels really inauthentic to me. It feels divorced from reality.
In what sense?
Sorry?
In what sense?
I think the film sort of expects us to believe that a lecture from a woman, right, Cassie, is going to prevent these men from assaulting again, which I find really, really difficult to believe, right? It also feels unreal because not one of the men she turns the tables on tries to attack her. We know that men feel entitled to women's bodies, right? And often react extremely violently if they're denied sex. But there's no indication in the film that even one of the scores of men she's exacted revenge from has turned violent towards her. Besides...
Yeah. Actually, there was so I read that, I read in a review where someone said, oh, there was one scene where she had a bruise on her hand. Do you remember? I don't remember
I,
the bruise.
I think they might have been referring to the ketchup on her hands. Do you remember that scene?
Oh,
Yeah, but
no,
that
yeah, I mean, I do, but I mean, maybe. I don't know. I think the person was saying that there's another scene where she's writing, and like, when she's like writing the names, like,
right,
whoever, so and so, my next conquest, like, you can see a bruise, but I don't remember that at all. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree that I think that's why they cast the one scene of that where they really flesh out everything that happened was the super bad guy, because he is like, a scrawny kind of nerdy guy. And
right,
imagine if she had done that with, and maybe she chooses the scrawny nerdy people because like she feels physically more safe around them instead of like, a big strapping man who, yeah, but I mean, obviously the super bad guy is still perfectly capable of assault. I mean, so
right, and
yeah,
of defending himself, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also brings me to the climax of the film. I think up until the bachelor party, it seems to me that the film is trying to cock a snook at the kinds of films that rely, sometimes, overly rely on depicting retribution, I think, in the form of physical pain and death as the only acceptable form of justice. But all this suddenly changes in the final act. With her murder, her subsequent, her death, you're left with this feeling of emptiness and hopelessness, as if there was no other way for Cassie to be whole, as if she couldn't be whole while she was still alive. Um, you see reality, of course, reflected in the fact that um, the man who raped Nina, the men and women who sort of enabled him, turned a blind eye to reports that she made, right, with the dean and other people at the medical school. The reality here is the fact that all these people go unpunished. And I really like that, right? But towards the end, there are two things that the film does that I do not like. First, I think it doesn't interrogate the role of white privilege, right? It doesn't really talk about how white privilege has protected the perpetrators up until this point. And I know that several other people have commented on the fact that, the film is not particularly diverse. I mean, it has one sort of black character, but she's, a sidekick. And second, I think the film jerkily sort of changes gears at the end and glorifies the criminal justice system for promptly arriving to investigate the murder of a woman and meting out justice by handcuffing Al during his wedding ceremony, which again is completely divorced from reality for me. So it feels like in some moments the film is hyper real, but in other in other sort of moments it's not, and I wasn't sure how to make sense of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Did
no,
you have
oh,
the film,
sorry.
or did you have similar problems with the film, or did you have a completely different sort of set of problems?
I also have a completely different set of problems, but I agree that, and I think what was interesting is that Emerald Fennel, I want to say Fennel, but I've also heard it Fennel. I want to like what Emerald Fennel said, which is that she actually wrote the film with a different ending at first, and she
Hmm.
ended it where Cassie dies, and that's it. And there's no kind of the addendum at the end where the police come rushing in and Angel of the Morning and all this stuff. Um, and I mean, I hear what you're saying about, it's in some ways it's problematic that Cassie has to die, but I actually prefer the ending where she just dies and that's it. And then nobody sees justice because yeah, I mean, like what you're saying, the police arriving is played as this kind of triumphant like, denouement of the whole story. And we're like, no, I mean, the police arriving is one part of the narrative of possible justice, but we know that just because someone's arrested does not mean that justice will actually be served, right? I mean, so and yeah, I mean, and because they are straight white men who are rich, right? They're doctors. So and the whole film so far, as you said, yeah, has kind of had a fairly skeptical, disillusioned, cynical view of criminal justice. That's why she's doing what she's doing, because she does not have faith in the system. And then, but she seems to suddenly put all her eggs in the basket of that system at the end. Also didn't like that when she's texting the scheduled text, it's like dot dot dot, because like she's not typing them, you know?
Yeah.
My family was saying maybe she's pretending to be dead, and maybe she got someone else to type schedule text, and then like it's typing. I don't know.
It's definitely creepy.
Yeah, and also the police come right at the moment when the texts arrive. Sorry, which is right when he's saying "I do" or whatever. Maybe we're meant to see it. Maybe the ending is meant to be a fantasy. I don't know. Maybe it's her dying fantasy. I have no idea. But yeah, for sure, I think Emerald Fennel, her original ending, I think, is a lot more true to the spirit of the rest of the film than whatever kind of tacked on producer like Hollywood studio ending that she was forced to add.
Right.
Yeah, and so I mean, can I talk about my problems with the film?
Yes, absolutely.
So one of my big problems of the film is, what I already kind of mentioned, which is that, in many ways it is approaching the idea of violence as expensive, right? Not just physical. Um, but at the same time, we see Cassie doing a lot of non-physical violence, in retaliation to the people that she believes have wronged her, Nina. And it's kind of, which, that's what that's as it may be, but I think the film also kind of presents it as something that we're meant to be like, oh, okay, well, that's all right then, that's fine. What I'm specifically thinking of is obviously the whole storyline with Alison Brie, where she has lunch with her, gets her drunk, and then leads her to believe that she has been assaulted by a man in a hotel room, right? She wakes up afterwards and finds herself in a room with a strange man who leads her to believe that he has assaulted her or something. We don't really see it. And then she continually calls Carey Mulligan afterwards and tries to get in touch with her and be like, what happened? Who is this man? And Carey Mulligan refuses to answer the phone and put her out of her misery, right? And so if we're saying that victim blaming is re-traumatizing and that is real trauma and that is real violence, I mean, I don't see there's really that much difference between assault, the psychological impact of someone having been assaulted while she was, passed out, and leading someone to believe that she has been assaulted while passed out. I mean, when you wake up, absent of the memories of the actual physical assault, are you not in almost the same situation as someone who has been assaulted? So for me, that was like, oh, wow, this character is doing that. Like, I cannot condone this at all. I think that's a horrible thing to do. And I also think that and so, I think one argument is that, well, nobody said she was perfect. I think we're meant to kind of look critically on that action. But what I think the film does is kind of present it in like a gotcha way, where finally Alison Brie shows up at her house and is like, tell me what happened. And she's like, oh, you weren't assaulted. And I think as the viewer, maybe, I think kind of presenting it in that way in the plot kind of is meant to be like, oh, you thought that but she's actually okay. And I'm like, it's not okay. It's not okay. None of it's okay. Like, don't try to present this to me as if it's okay, because it's not. So for me, that's one way in which I think the actual kind of plot devices and the plot mechanisms of the film are actually undermining what is one of its core themes, which is that violence is not just physical. And another way that is related, that where I think the same thing happens, where we're presented with this sort of gotcha moment that to me is like, I don't care, like this is still bad, is the whole storyline with Bo Burnham, his character, is it Ryan, whatever, where we see from the beginning that he does a lot of kind of sketchy things. He ignores the fact that she gave him a fake number. I mean, people don't do that, because they forgot their numbers, right? Like, we all know that sometimes the only way to get rid of somebody is to give them a fake number, and you should respect that if you receive a fake number. He kind of not tricks her, but like kind of like brings her to his apartment on the first date and is like, oh, would you look at that? We're at my apartment, which is, I think, very bad. Don't do that.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. He shows up at her workplace over and over again. After she gave the fake number, he shows up at her workplace. He also says that the friends from med school are, not that bad, and he's still friends with them. I mean, that's not in and of itself an act of violence, but it's still kind of an indicator. Okay, maybe this man is not as
own, right?
Yeah, he's not as feminist as we maybe think, or progressive. And then so when there's that moment, right, where she then finds out that he was actually a bystander of Dina's rape, and he was actually in the video. You can hear his voice in the video. He was there watching it while it happens. And she's like, oh my God, he's a bad man. I'm like, I know he's a bad man. Like, maybe I didn't know that he was capable of, kind of being a bystander to rape and kind of allowing the rape to go on. But if you had asked me, like, is Bo Burnham a very progressive man when it comes to gender dynamics and sexual dynamics? I would say no. Like, I already can tell you all the things that he's been doing that are bad. Yeah, and the film is kind of training us, right, in Cassie's treatment of the other characters who she perceives as being quote unquote bad, to kind of look out for these small little things, right? I mean, and so I'm already doing that. I'm doing that as the film seems to want me to do. And then it wants me to be like, but you didn't know that he was bad. And, for me, I was like, no, it's cheap. It's a cheap shot. Like,
shock for me.
Sorry?
The reveal is not a big shock for me, right? I mean, it doesn't actually give you any kind of insight, right? Yeah, he's been exposed to be a bad guy, but what is that really telling me about men? What is that really telling me about how complicit all of us are in maintaining sort of rape culture, right? And you're absolutely right. I think the film definitely tries to position that as a gotcha moment. It sort of convinces you, or tries to convince you and lull you into the sense of security that there's at least one sort of character in the film, one male character in the film who's dependable. But that also makes me wonder, and I was going to ask you this question. There is a strange sort of middle in the film that seems like it could be a romantic comedy. I mean, on the one hand, I really appreciate that they take time to sort of build Cassie's relationship with Ryan, or whatever his name is, because that makes it authentic, it makes it believable. But did you think the film really needed to do that in order to set the viewers up for that final sort of reveal that Ryan is a bad guy?
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about that. And I think you're specifically talking about the Paris Hilton montage, right? Where they're like popping potato chip bags in the convenience store or whatever, right? And yeah, I mean, I think when that happened, I think it's hard not to see that ironically, right? When that montage happened. And for me, it was like, okay, something's gonna happen, obviously, with this relationship, because you're going really over the top with the pop music. And also one thing that I noticed is that, the whole montage, she's only wearing pink and he's only wearing blue. And I was like, okay, so the costuming in this scene is kind of signaling these like extremely kind of stereotypical gender roles, which is never a good sign in a movie that I know is thinking about gender roles and trying to complicate them. Yeah, I mean, I think watching, actually, I mean, I quite like the montage in that way, because I think cinematically it is kind of like winking one eye at those kind of more sincere romantic comedy montages. And yeah, I mean, I think the film has a really interesting relationship to the whole idea of cinematic convention, of genre convention, both as a quote unquote romantic comedy and a genre film, right? I mean, neither of those labels really fit the film, and they shouldn't, right? Because this film is about subject matter that is way more complicated than either of those things can really encompass, right? And I think so the film very smartly with the montage, to me, is kind of signaling like, hey, I know that something like this, a story about sexual assault, a story about recovery, a story about trauma, can't really fit into the conventions of kind of traditional cinematic narrative, right? Whether rom-com or revenge movie. Neither of these things are really gonna really capture the complexity and the depth and the kind of sprawling like messiness of these themes. So I actually like the montage for that reason, because it's kind of winking an eye, I think, at being, yeah, I mean, kind of signaling that. But of course, I think for me, whatever goodwill is built up by that montage and its relationship to cinematic convention is then at the same time kind of balanced out by the ending, which very much adheres to cinematic convention, and ideas of like resolution and, kind of like cartoon villains and the police and all that, like that. I think, again, by the time the film has brought me to the ending, I've already kind of been coached by the film to be suspicious of all these things. And so, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the romantic sort of comedy sequence in the film does something else for me. It sort of hints at the possibility that healing is possible, right? Because you don't really get to talk about healing at all. I mean, we talked a little bit about how Cassie sort of processes her trauma, right? And it's always, revenge sort of focused. It's never about, how am I going to heal? How am I going to move forward from this clearly traumatic event that has taken place in my life? But for those few minutes, when she's being happy, she's let her guard down, you see that real possibility that she might be able to move on from her best friend's death. And then that sort of gets snatched away, which was sort of disappointing to me, especially because, like we were saying, the way the sequence was set up and the big reveal at the end, it didn't really do anything for the narrative, right? It didn't really do anything to our understanding of all the different sort of players who are involved in propping up rape culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. That yeah, I mean, it's almost cruel to to the character to be like, you can actually move on, and that is when she gives up her mission, right, to kind of lecture drunk men, for whatever that's worth. Yeah, and actually, so this kind of the idea of Cassie and her recovery and the possibility of recovery for her kind of gets at one other area where I think the film maybe is lacking a little bit, which is whether or not we're supposed to root for her, right? And I kind of mentioned this already in the sense that I can't root for someone who is making other people think that they've been raped. However much you feel that that person is wrong, I mean, if you take rape seriously as a trauma, then you should not be inflicting that trauma to other people. I mean, it's obvious. But I also think in general, right, the film kind of tries to toe a line between being kind of supportive and enthusiastic about Cassie's activities, and then also kind of being like kind of critical and kind of showing that this is somebody who has some sort of arrested development, somebody who has some sort of mental illness, which is why she's living in this way. I mean, we have Molly Shannon, right, Nina's mom, who tells her, like, stop doing this, like, just stop, because it's not good for Nina and it's not good for you, and don't be a child, I think is what she says. And then that this idea of don't be a child is very echoed by her father, right, who tells her, we've missed you this whole time, like you haven't been around, right? I mean, it's like you were stuck. It's like you're stuck at whatever age you were when you dropped out of med school and you've never been able to grow up. And the whole idea of her living at home and she forgot her 30th birthday, which, I just want to say that, like, living at home does not necessarily mean that, you are some kind of sociopath. I just want to say that for the record, because as I mentioned to Shailey, when that scene happened, I was like, I feel really attacked right now. But in the, I guess, American context of this, it's meant to, living at home when you're in your 30s is meant to be a shorthand for there's something deeply wrong with you, and fine, I'll accept that at face value. So these are all ways that the film is trying to kind of show you, this character is not maybe the kind of hero that she sees herself as, right? That for many other people in society, that there's something deeply wrong with her that needs time and effort to kind of fix. But I don't know, these are such subtle things. Like I think in general, the overall, again, like the plot mechanisms and the way the film is presented, the genre conventions and all present her as something that we are supposed to cheer for. And so for me, like, I'm like, yeah, I see her as really flawed, but I don't think the film really agrees with me. It's kind of like all over the place.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it is all over the place. But the film does position her as somebody who's meant to be empowered, right? Because she is taking, she's in control of her life. Yes, she might not be able to move on from the trauma that she experienced, but, she is somebody who confidently is able to go out, pretend drunk, go over to a guy's house and still sort of retain control over the situation. So in that sense, I think the film is setting you up to root for her, because she's supposed to be an empowered woman, right? And I think the film sort of underlines this sort of message of empowerment even in her death. So you start to feel bad after her body has been, burned, cremated. But then you have this situation where you're in the wedding and Ryan sort of receives those text messages, right? Communicating to you as a viewer that even in her death, she's in control of her life and the life of, people around her, which I thought was really interesting, because the only way for women to remain in control is by dying. And that was the only plausible end that she could meet with once she had started on this path of empowerment. I'm not entirely sure what to sort of make of that, but like you said, it's really messy, right? Because it's possible to read the film in so many different ways, to read Cassie's character in so many different ways, that you're not sure if the film is trying to give you one sort of cohesive message.
Yeah. I mean, we keep coming back to the ending, right? And the ending kind of being like kind of where we get off the train in many ways. I think, the fact that she died, it for me, it kind of reminds me, I was trying to think of other women in cinematic history who have died in the act of trying to seek revenge, right? Or avenge other people. And I was thinking of Thelma and Louise die at the end of the movie. I was thinking of Inglourious Basterds, which is also, one of my favorite movies, but the Melanie Laurent character, Shoshana, dies, in an act of revenge for Jewish people, I guess, against Hitler. And so I think, you're right. I think we see a lot of female characters who, kind of are put on this path of radical empowerment and radical revenge and all that, and then kind of like we can't let them live after that because they've crossed a moral line that as a society we cannot condone when women, go that far.
Right. No, absolutely. And you were earlier saying the father sort of at one point comments that he's really happy to have Cassie back. And thinking back to the film that happens when Cassie's starting, her sort of
Bo Burnham.
Yeah, with Ryan. And I wonder what that says about sort of women's relationship to this idea of happiness. I mean, can we only find healing? Can we only find happiness when it's attached to a man? But on the other hand, the film is also saying that there's a lot of unhappiness, there's a lot of trauma to be had from association with men. And I find that sort of dichotomy really interesting as well.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask you now about something that we kind of mentioned very briefly, but this idea of the voice of the survivor, right? And in this case, the absence of the voice of the survivor. So we do have a scene when she's torturing Elle Monroe on the bed where she does kind of give a speech. She says like, Nina was like fully formed and she sprung out of the womb fully formed or whatever. And I can't even she literally said, I can't even put into words. It's hard to describe what she was like because she was so herself, which I was like, oh, that's interesting that you, in talking about her in this moment that is supposedly, about telling us finally who was Nina? Like, we don't know, right? This whole thing is for Nina. But even in this moment, you're saying like, I can't even communicate to you who Nina was. I thought that was an interesting moment. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. And overall, just the idea of what role the survivors should play in justice in general.
Right. So I think it was pretty striking that Nina's voice was completely absent from the film. And I guess it was striking because everything appears to be about Nina, right? Every single decision that Cassie makes, every move she makes is about Nina. But we never actually hear from her, not in the present, not in flashbacks. And, there are many moments when this conversation with Nina could have been made possible, but the film sort of steers away from that. And again, trying to sort of deconstruct why that might be, I wondered if this was meant to be a statement about how patriarchal sort of societies erase women, their contributions, their ways of being, right? Maybe it's a comment on how women don't really have any agency in the present world that we live in, which is why Nina is denied agency. But I do think that we had to ask ourselves, what did she want? Is Cassie violating her friendship with Nina by acting on her behalf without her explicit consent? Is Cassie, and I'm still sort of playing around with this idea a little bit, but is Cassie meant to be read as a performative ally? Somebody who takes unilateral action. She may think she's doing the right thing by avenging Nina's rape, but that is not her decision to make, right? For me, it also makes me question the kind of support that Cassie provided to Nina, the 7 years between the sexual assault and her eventual death.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we could have, I think what you're saying is right, where we could have easily had been given some kind of inkling of what Nina would have thought about all of this, whether she would have said, like, don't do this. This is extremely unhealthy and dangerous, which is what Molly Shannon says, right? But again, Molly Shannon is her mom. Like, she's not speaking. She also cannot speak for Nina, right? But she, I guess, is the closest thing that we have right now to Nina. And Molly Shannon does say, like, you should stop this. It's not good for Nina. But you're right. And I mean, I'm thinking about, when we talk about, I think one thing that's very important for us at AWARE and at SACC is to be survivor-centric, right? We talk about this a lot. We use that word a lot, both in our services and the kind of way that we hope that the justice system and other forms of, and other, I guess, institutions that handle sexual violence can act in their policies and practices. I don't know if you have anything to add on that level. Hello? Hello?
Hey.
Oh, am I there?
Yes, you're there.
Okay, sorry. Did you hear what I said?
No. I mean,
Oh.
I
Okay.
Sorry. I'm repeating yourself.
No, I said, yeah, we talk about we say the phrase survivor-centric a lot when we think about, both our own support services for women and also for, and also what we kind of wish to see in the justice system in Singapore. And it makes me think of, yeah, this idea of what role the survivor has to play, right, in both in their own kind of recovery and also their own justice. I mean, I'm thinking of the case last year at NUS with Jeremy Fernando, the professor who was found to have kind of sent inappropriate texts. I can't even remember what he did. Assaulted someone. And one thing that we commented on as an organization was the fact that the school did go ahead and file a police report about what he did without consulting the victims first.
Right.
And only later did the survivors say, actually, I wasn't told that they were going to be making a police report about my own case, and that's not necessarily what I would have wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a slightly complicated sort of discussion to have, right? Because you do need to think about the legal requirements to report, especially when you're in possession of knowledge of a crime. So I think it might not be so straightforward. And I don't think we have enough time to actually go into the details, but I know what you're getting at in terms of the role that, victim survivors can play in not only sort of seeking help, but in sort of participating in some kind of advocacy or activism that can keep this fight against sexual assault alive, right? And I think that given sort of the history of Me Too, we know that victim survivors often have to deal with a lot of pressure to sort of speak up, right? There's this pressure that if you've experienced trauma, you should speak up because it might empower somebody else. It might also help you process your trauma, but it doesn't take into account the emotional burden, the psychological burden that may place on you, right? It doesn't take into account whether or not you are ready as a victim survivor to share your story with everybody, right? It doesn't acknowledge the risk that you're taking by going public. I mean, we see this all the time, right? I mean, women take to social media because they've exhausted every other sort of avenue available to them, and only to be met with victim blaming comments, not just from strangers, not just from people they haven't met, but also from friends and family members who think that, you know, they put themselves in harm's way. And I think that when we expect as a society to put that burden on survivors, on victims, we need to be able to provide them with enough support so that they can deal with the backlash, you know, is coming, right? But we don't really focus on that. We're so focused on sort of, I guess, taking in, you know, both the trauma as well as other details of the story, that we get fixated on that, not on the support the survivor requires, not on, you know, what you can do as a bystander to support, not only to intervene, you know, actively in a situation where something traumatic is happening, but what you can do to support the survivor after she has already experienced trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point too, right? Is that, you know, that even the idea of survivors speaking up at all is should be kind of looked at and interrogated with more complexity. Um, and yeah, I mean, that is something that we think about a lot at Aware too, right? I mean, obviously when, you know, we handle the communications for Aware, so when we do kind of, you know, recommend a survivor to be interviewed by the press or whatever, right? Or to speak on a panel, we do try to kind of speak to them beforehand and say, like, you know, just so you know, these are all the risks that you might be facing as somebody who is sharing your story publicly. Are you still willing to do it? It's fine if you don't want to, right? I mean, we have to be very careful to do that. But I also think, you know, in that way, kind of recognizing the burden and the danger of survivors speaking out, and that is kind of where the role of organizations like Aware can kind of step in, right? Where we do act as kind of like a buffer or a shield sometimes for survivors that we work with, who are doing media, or who are, you know, yeah, who are just kind of seeking support at Aware. We do try to kind of like protect them from as much of the kind of other the forms of re-traumatization that might occur. And that kind of leads me to my last point that I want to make, which is kind of different alternative avenues for justice and recovery and action that someone like Cassie could take, or even the other characters in this film, right? I think one thing that a lot of people that I've read, a lot of critics have complained about with the film is that is extremely kind of bleak and nihilistic. And you kind of get the sense of like this kind of endless spiral of like pain, right? That is just kind of like being inflicted upon more and more and more people. I think about that shot at the end where like the wedding party is kind of looking at Al Monroe being dragged off. And for me, when I look at that shot, I can't help but be like, more victims. You know, like here's a whole bunch of family members who now are kind of will have to grapple with the shock and, you know, pain of their loved one being dragged away on his wedding. And so for me, that's kind of just like, wow, you know, it really like this story kind of has an endless, like, yeah, it's just a spiraling number of victims. And so I guess one thing that I don't want to rewrite the movie. That's not, you know, I don't think that's really like I don't know, I don't think that's such a fruitful discussion. But I do want to kind of talk about some, you know, possible options for some of these characters, that, you know, if they were real, I would be kind of trying to offer and provide to them instead of death and more violence, right? Which is what we see. And so for someone like you know, Al Monroe, who's Nina's rapist, you know, hopefully therapy, counseling, you know, education on gender violence, right, and sexual violence. I think for someone like Connie Britton, who's the dean of the school, herself and hopefully her staff and the rest of the school can undergo training and kind of put in place better policies and procedures for the school, right? So that, as she mentions, she gets like a case every week, right? And I'm not surprised by that because I think that's fairly accurate for the amount of sexual violence we see on campuses. So she should have really strong processes in place at this point, but it seems like she doesn't. And then for someone like Cassie, who is so full of like rage and frustration. And again, speaking from the point of view of someone who is also very full of rage and frustration about sexual violence, I mean, I think there are very productive ways that she could channel her actions, right, into advocacy, activism. She can, work at Aware. There's always a place for her, she can answer our helpline. I think the film also kind of doesn't show that helplines exist and there are support services for survivors of sexual violence all over the world. Yeah, I mean, and then even someone like Bo Burnham, who is unmasked at the end as complicit. I also didn't like his kind of his quick descent into like villainy, where he's like, "You're a failure" or whatever at the end. I'm like, oh, okay, so I would have liked to see the character be, or any character in this film just be like, yeah, I did some horrible things, but I've had some time in that time to kind of really examine why and understand why I did what I did, and I don't think there's any excuse. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I have also put in the work and taken the time to try to right those wrongs and understand my own straight white male privilege, and I've committed to being a better person. And so instead of being like, well, I was a kid, saying that instead, right? And I think if he had said that, I would have been like, okay, like, we can't, like, he's growing. Like, I don't expect him to be like, perfect, but he's growing.
I think the other thing that really bothers me is that we know from our work, our experience with survivors of sexual assault, that healing often looks very different for different survivors, right? Everybody charts their own path. That's not a sense that you get from the film. Everybody sort of ends up on an identical journey. They don't really grow as individuals. They don't really confront, past sort of assaults, misdeeds, whatever it might be. Everybody is exactly where they were when this rape sort of first happened. And again, that makes me wonder if, again, that's a comment on the fact that a lot of us sort of remain trapped in the people we were in, high school and universities, and whether and how we can grow as individuals. I mean, everybody has made mistakes. The film does not really give you, and not to say that raping somebody is a mistake, it's so much bigger than a mistake, right? But I'm thinking of all the other sort of characters, the enablers, the bystanders who refuse to do anything. What sort of pathways do we see for themselves is what you're saying, right? How do they rehabilitate themselves? I think that's a good conversation that we need to have, that we don't have the time for today, but I wish it was something that the film had commented on.
Yeah. Speaking of time, I just want to say that we welcome questions. If anybody has questions, I know we've been talking a lot. If you have any questions, I can see the comments on Facebook, so please ask the questions. But yeah, I mean, on this subject, right, I do want to mention that there are kind of two characters that have a little bit a semblance of understanding and growth, and they are Alison Brie and Alfred Molina. And Alison Brie, kind of after being subjected to this kind of mental rape, this imaginary rape, she does kind of have some remorse, and that's why she gives the phone with the video to Cassie. But and she also says like, never contact me again, which to me is kind of like, okay, so like, yeah, I mean, we sense that she does feel guilt at the very least. It's not enough. It's not definitely not in any way like a complete recovery or rehabilitation or learning, but we get the sense that she feels guilt at least. And then for Alfred Molina, I think it's a very interesting case, right? Because in many ways, what we see of him, he's like a total kind of wreck, right? I mean, he is totally remorseful. He says he can't sleep. He'll never forgive himself. He's the only character that says, "I like, please forgive me," right? To Carey Mulligan, and we can talk about whether Carey Mulligan is really in the place to be forgiving him, right? Or whether, who is she to forgive him? But yeah, I think it was interesting that he's kind of positioned as like the kind of mirror image, like male equivalent of what a survivor, the PTSD and trauma that a survivor is going through, right? A lot of survivors have trouble sleeping. A lot of survivors, kind of go through the psychological pain that Alfred Molina is going through. But so I think that was interesting, and I do like that we see someone having gone through and experienced that. But I also think, yeah, I have a couple problems with that as well, right? One of them being that he says that he had this epiphany after like a psychotic break. And I just think like that's very convenient, like I would have liked to see him say like, I really put in a lot of work and I spent years trying to unlearn what I've done. And it was very difficult because I'm blinded by my privilege, but finally I have read and learned and talked to a lot of people and I've listened and I finally understand why what I did was wrong and I'm trying to now make amends, instead of him being like, one day I had this psychotic breakdown and it all came to me in a flash and now I see everything and I understand. I'm like, wow, that was easy for you. Like,
Right.
that's great. That's great. Good for you. Does this ever happen in real life? I mean, maybe, I don't know, but I don't think so. Like, I don't think it's so easy to just suddenly shed all your toxic masculinity and your violence and, everything that you've ever learned your whole life in one, like, split second and be like, I see the light. So yeah, I would like to have seen any character put in a bit of work to, just kind of like, yeah, unlearning all the things that Carey Mulligan has already unlearned. I mean, she's there. We know it's possible for people to get better and to learn these truths about
Right.
gender and sexual violence.
Yeah, exactly. So we're almost at 9 o'clock, and it looks like we have no questions from the audience to respond to. Should we wrap this discussion up?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I don't. Yeah. I don't want to subject more people to my monologues anymore. Oh.
Oh, there is a
question.
Yes.
Damn it. We were just about to go.
Oh, okay. Yes,
what do
we
you
did.
think about the resolution being the play of a time? Yes. So yeah, we did talk about this, but just to quickly summarize, we found that it kind of rang a bit hollow to kind of place so much faith for the story to place so much faith in the criminal justice system, particularly when it had been very critical of the possibility of justice through traditional methods for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts on Promising Young Women, Shailey?
I want to actually go back and watch the film again. I know Prashant mentioned that it's still playing at the projector, and I would, love to watch it again. Given this discussion, given that I've had more time to sort of think about what the film is doing and not doing, I would love to watch it again. Do you have any final thoughts?
My final thoughts are I mean, I think that we are seeing, as this is what we said during Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, right? We are seeing like a huge wave of really interesting and intelligent films, mostly made by women, about sexual violence, right? And I'm really thankful for that. And I think that is a logical outcome of the Me Too movement, right? And I mean, I think something like I May Destroy You, which is a TV show, not a film, but it's also kind of exploring a lot of the same ideas and themes as this, right? In the sense that it's really investigating the range of behaviors that can constitute violence, not just capital R like rape, right? Which is what like 99% of, I guess, male created films portray as what sexual violence is. So yeah, I mean, I think we should all continue to watch these fantastic pieces of content, and I also want to plug Nomadland, which I think is a really excellent and extremely feminist film. If only we could do another feminist film club discussion about Nomadland, because I also have a lot to say about that film. Completely different from this film, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think Apurva might be interested in Unbelievable if she hasn't already watched it, because that really talks about the criminal justice system and how sexual assault survivors are treated. Right? It's not just about one interaction with a police officer when you're filing your sort of report of assault. It's the number of times you have to sort of go over your story, how re-traumatizing that is, the hoops that you have to jump through in order to make people believe that you were genuinely raped. Yeah, that's a fascinating TV series, and I think it's also really, really well done.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these we're naming are TV series, and I think it's probably because, again, like sexual violence is so complex that it's really hard to kind of capture
Yeah.
its essence, right, and boil it down to like a 90-minute film, right? I mean, some films are able to do that, but it's just very difficult. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you to the projector for having us. Thank you to everyone who is watching. Projector, we're getting Wong Kar-wai tickets, right, as payment for this talk? Yeah, okay. We'll talk about that later. Yeah, any last words, Shailey?
No, just follow us on social media. I'm sure a lot of you already follow the projector. If you don't already follow Aware, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We organize a lot of events. I mean, this month has been particularly busy because of International Women's Day, but we do try and organize, a series of sort of panel discussions, film discussions, other things. So if you're interested in joining us again, I think the best place to find out more information about the events we organize is social media.
Yay! Okay.
Okay.
All right.
This is awkward, but yes, this is good night.
Yeah, we never know how